climate change adaptation, and the platforms, the governments, and the workers must all work together to reform the process of a change to the labor market through social dialogue. The alignment of employment as well as education can accelerate climate action and speed up a just transition to more sustainable communities. This session, Role of Platforms to Ensure Just Transition, aims to explore the best possible options for implementation and exchanging experiences. Please welcome with me our distinguished moderator, Ms. Farhina Libehoy, Head of JP Morgan Development Finance Institution, our distinguished panelists, Mr. James Cartledge, HMT Exchequer Secretary. We have Mr. Samaila Zubaro, President, African Finance Corporation. And we have Mr. Ibrahim Sarhan, CEO, eFinance Investment Group. We have, of course, with us, Ms. Justin Nixon, Vice President, Corporate Social Responsibility and ESG IBM. And hopefully we'll be having shortly Mr. Jürgen Weiternick, First Vice President of EBRD. Thank you so much.
So good afternoon, everyone. It is my distinct honor to moderate today's Finance Day panel on the role of platforms to ensure a just transition. It's clear that this year's COP discussions have brought a just transition into sharp focus, and I'm pleased to have several distinguished government officials, head of multilateral development banks, and the C-suite of private sector companies to discuss this important topic. Just to set the stage and leverage the recent August 2022 UN report on just transition, it is clear that moving to a greener economy will require a change in employment profiles and skills, and also an evolution of industries and markets that are competitive in each country. Both national governments and private sector companies will need to work together to create programs, spur investment and training to make their economies transition to a low carbon base. There will also be an incredible opportunity to create new jobs and to invest in adaptation. An important component of this, of course, will be technology and innovation that we'll hear about shortly. So given this context, I'd like to start off with Minister Cartledge. May I ask you to kick us off, as the UK has been an active partner in working with a multitude of stakeholders to drive climate ambition and has been a strong component of the concept of country platforms, including through your role in the G20. What roles can contributing governments play as a part of a platform, and how can they specifically support a just transition? And I'd love your definition of a platform as well, so that we've got a lot of questions about that.
It's already on, yours. Hey, fantastic. My first event where the sound is working pretty well. Can everyone hear me? Thank you. Thank you very much. Absolute pleasure to be here. And on this incredible panel of private sector experience. Obviously, I am a government minister. I'm effectively, might say, a deputy finance minister from the United Kingdom. The official role is Exchequer Secretary in the Treasury, which is the UK Finance Department. So obviously wanted to give you the UK government view on this really important question. So look, you all know this is a big challenge, and it's really important if we're to keep the 1.5 degrees goal within reach, which is easy, lots of difficult decisions to make. Lots of countries around the world are setting ambitious emissions targets. Their targets are all different, reflecting the unique policy pathways every country has to take to fight climate change. And meeting those targets will require a huge amount of finance. I think that's one thing we've heard in every session I've been in. Everyone knows the scale of the challenge, right? So the biggest challenge is bringing public and private finance together behind countries' ambitious plans in a targeted and coordinated way. And this is where these partnerships come in. So Just Energy Transition Partnerships provide the framework to drive ambition to help countries achieve their emissions reductions in two ways. Firstly, by setting out the ambition in a clear, actionable way through an investment plan, And secondly, by matching that investment plan to a range of financial sources, both public and private, to realise that ambition. Now, if you want to realise that ambition, it has to be driven by the host country's own sovereign planning and decision-making through investment plans that are developed in country to ensure that the level of ambition and the route to achieve it is aligned with their own specific circumstances. We're here in COP in a multilateral setting where all different countries meeting, but ultimately these things have to be driven by sovereign nations. Countries are on their own transition pathways, but some are at a critical point in their economic development. We're realising these plans can now have a drastic impact, such as in South Africa, where the UK announced on Monday a package worth up to $1.8 billion. And we must be clear that just energy transition partnerships are not a short-term trend, but a long-term policy and financing commitment that will bring lasting change. And to succeed, we need everyone to get behind them, government, private finance, philanthropy, so platforms will bring all these actors together, which is why we've got such a range of speakers, I think. Countries need to demonstrate a clear commitment to long-term policy reforms, signal to investors that these are good, bankable projects. We've heard in all the sessions about the need to get more private finance, and this is absolutely crucial. And if we commit and take the time and resource needed to make these an effective initiative with the appropriate scale and backing, we can take care of this element, which is obviously the just cause, this doing the right thing. Across the range of tools and instruments offered under these country platforms, we can equip people with the resources and tools needed to retrain, reskill, and realise the just transition. I know to my right, we've got, for example, someone who deals with a large company and skills, and I think also our other panelists, this is a huge important area. And I know that the Egyptians, our brilliant hosts, are undertaking their own country platform venture with the EBRD. I don't think he's arrived. No. This is a country platform that the UK is also supporting. The nexus of what we call water, food and energy platform tackles many of these critical issues, representing a major acceleration of Egypt's energy transition by shifting on a gigawatt scale from gas to renewables. It demonstrates how working with others, in this case the NDBs, can mobilise private finance for renewable investments. I think you may know that the largest solar project is in Egypt, and almost $100 billion of it was funded by the UK. So the UK is pleased to be able to support the Luafi partnership to help deliver climate action, and so we believe that this type of platform-based policy commitment can deliver a sustainable, equitable transition for all.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your comments, and I'm happy that you set up what a platform is. It's a partnership, it's a framework, and that vision of sovereign nations leading their own destiny and setting guidelines of what they'd like to do, and then hearing about the UK's direct commitments and financing. So thank you so much for that. If I could then turn to Mr. Zubairu, could you perhaps speak to more Pan-African experience in which challenges of climate change and energy transition in particular? What's been successful, and where has the AFC been playing a role in trying to help this? Your institution is known as Africa's infrastructure solution provider, and how are you looking to climate-proof these investments as we look forward? How do you work with partners, and what are your thoughts about training and resourcing of labor?
Thank you very much. Thanks for that very important and long question. I'll try and fit it all in. So I think the best way to start is to look at where Africa is in terms of, first, energy access. So energy access in Africa is very low, which is why we have the low emissions that we have. We have, on average, 180 kilowatts per hour consumption in sub-Saharan Africa. That is about 1.3%, 13,000 kilowatt per hour consumption in the States, and about 3.7 of that, about 3% of that in the Europe. That's about 6,500. So when you look at these numbers and the fact that we have over 600 million people without access to electricity, and we have about 970 million people without access to clean cooking. So you understand that for Africa, it's not really a transition to lower carbon-intensive energy sources, but more an access to energy in the first instance. That is not to say that Africa has no part to play in achieving global net zero. In fact, we're already playing that part. because Africa's forests today are absorbing 1,500 billion tons of carbon dioxide. That's about offsetting the emissions of 320 million cars. And then if you also consider the fact that these forests are fast depleting because of growing population, and the fact that that's the main source of cooking for most Africans, you understand that there's a strong need for us to preserve those forests, to grow the forest again in a sustainable way, which is why conversations around carbon credit are so important, and conversation around generally poverty reduction and economic development is very important. Now, when we look at energy transition, talking about what has worked and where the challenges are, we have to make a point that Africa's energy consumption is going to grow because the population is growing. It is projected to grow from 20% of the world population today to 25% of the world's population. It's also projected to have the youngest workforce. So for all of this to happen, we are going to need more energy. And if we also look at the scale of the need for resources and materials going forward for the energy transition to occur, then we know that there's a lot more resources that will be required from Africa. And what we are advocating is we need to look at the entire business model of the world as it is today and see how can we be more efficient in a way that Africa will develop, but will develop in a more sustainable way. We don't need to follow the path of what has happened before. We have significant renewable sources on the continent. We all recognize that renewable energy is one of the cheapest sources of energy, but the challenge is actually building them in the first instance because of the high cost and the fact that we have significant exposure to devastating impacts of climate without the capacity and the resources to deal with it. So we need to talk about how can we have better access to finance, how can we have access to finance at a lower cost. Talking about what has worked, most African countries actually use renewable energy. If you check the energy mix of most African countries, it is renewable energy. Apart from South Africa, Algeria, and Egypt, most other countries have more renewable energy sources in the mix than fossil fuels. And in cases where they have fossil fuels, they also have a program for replacing them. So for example, in Senegal, where they have recently discovered gas, they're thinking about changing coal-fired plants and fuel oil plants to gas-based plants. And we are helping them there because we know that that will reduce carbon emissions, it will reduce SOx and NOx emissions, it will reduce the electricity tariff in the country, and it will be more sustainable going forward. We are also the first to build independent power plant in Cape Verde. And there's a wind farm there, providing 20% of the energy requirements of the island. We're also building a wind farm currently in Djibouti. It's going to replace a lot of imported energy from Ethiopia, and also fuel oil and diesel generators in the country. So if you look at the entire spectrum, Africans are using renewable energy sources, and they understand the importance of it, and it continues to be a part of the energy mix. So we are advocating that since we know that industrialization needs to take place in Africa to accommodate the increased population and jobs for the increased population, we need to look at supply chains differently. We need to look at, for example, if we take electric mobility, we know that we have about 6 million electric cars now. Some people say it's 8 million, but we know it's going to be over 100 million going forward. If you imagine the scale of resources required for that transition to happen, then you know that we cannot use supply chains or invest as we currently do. We are looking at the fact that for most of the minerals, battery minerals that are required going forward, a lot of that needs to be mined out of Africa. That mining should be done in a sustainable way, and there should be processing of those resources in Africa. If you look at the scale of minerals and metals for electric vehicles, we're told that it's 6 times more minerals and metals than for an internal combustion engine car. We're told that it is 11 times more minerals and metals for a wind turbine than a gas turbine. So just imagine the scale of materials required for this. And most of these resources are in Africa. It will not make sense to ship those materials to one corner of the world and only to export them from that corner of the world back to, including Africa, where we know we need a lot of stock of this goods. So the key going forward is how can we localize processing and industry in Africa in a way that the supply chains are more resilient and even the cost is more affordable for Europe and America. We are looking at how can we utilize the vast solar sources that exist on the continent. We are currently having 60% of the best solar sources on the continent, and less than 1% of that is built. The argument is we want to build those solar sources so that as our energy use increases, we're using those renewable sources. But it can't be that we're going to import all those solar panels from Asia. It has to be that we use the natural gas that's in Africa, the sand that is in Africa, to build the PV panels that we will utilize. So for a lot of these things that we know are required for the energy transition, it is important that we take a step back and look at what is the carbon footprint that exists in the supply chain today. How can we plan going forward, take decisions to reduce those emissions and to create jobs and prosperity in Africa? Because we can't just look at energy transition without looking at jobs and poverty reduction on the continent. It is important that all of that is considered. Just finally, on the question about how we are looking at climate proofing infrastructure and project finance transactions. So we have recently launched Infrastructure Climate Resilience Fund. The purpose of that is to see how we can incorporate climate risk in fiscal infrastructure build. We know that Africa requires about $2.3 trillion for infrastructure. If you look at the impacts of climate and COVID, it's about $3 trillion. Now, most of that infrastructure is not yet built. We are advocating that in building that infrastructure, we make it climate resilient. And to do that is going to require additional costs. And so we are raising a fund to create a first loss from institutions like the Green Climate Fund, so that we can have commercial capital on top of that for co-investment with us. If you look at a typical road, to climate-proof it is going to be 30% more expensive. So we're hoping that the force loss, the guarantees and insurance products that we procure will allow us to build that, that infrastructure. Like I mentioned, we are looking at solar seriously. We have recently acquired Lekela, which is the largest renewable asset company on the continent. So we're today one of the largest investors in renewable energy on the continent. And we intend to increase the pace of those investments over time. We currently have about 1.4 gigawatts of capacity. We are looking to grow that to 3 gigawatts in the first instance. So there is significant scope for us to grow renewable energy assets on the continent. There is significant scope to climate-proof infrastructure on the continent. We just need to find a way of financially innovating to reduce the cost of capital and to improve access to capital.
Thank you so much. I think you answered all my questions and went beyond. Thank you for really focusing on Africa's, the fact that we're not using a lot of power and that more is needed. And I used to live in Senegal, so I appreciate your references to the Lekela wind farm there and also to the renewable energy that they're doing, and for your call for action for financing, and also to having locally based supply chains. Thank you for those comments. If we could then take a different tack and move to focusing on technology and upskilling, and ask Justina Nixon to speak on IBM's experience in facilitating a just transition. How do you work with your clients in training their workforce and adapting to climate change? What solutions has your firm been offering to countries and companies as they adapt to the new realities of climate?
Yeah, so first of all, it's an honor to be arrived earlier today, and I'm sure it's overwhelming for everyone as it is for me. But it's amazing the discussions that are occurring. When we're a technology company, and this has been top of mind, a priority for the tech sector, but really every industry is focused on this. How do you make sure your own employees are upskilled? How do you work with clients, but also society at large? So I can tell you, IBM is very focused on internally, how do we upskill our employees to help as we look into creating innovative solutions, technology that help clients with sustainability and other solutions. We also work very closely with clients to help with that skilling as well. But really, one of the major things we do is skill society at large with a focus on vulnerable communities. And last year, we made a commitment to skill 30 million people by 2030 globally. And we focus on communities that have been underrepresented in the technology field. We focus on women and girls. We focus on refugees. So really looking are being left behind, right? Being left behind with rapid technology advancements, being left behind because of climate change as well. And this is really all about the just transition. It's not enough that we are creating solutions and implementing those solutions, but how do we make sure that we are meeting the needs of those populations, providing the skills that they need, and giving them those job opportunities as well. So there are a few examples.
Through your philanthropic efforts, or is
Yes. So I lead our global corporate social responsibility function. So our 30 million commitment is through our really part of our corporate social responsibility and through our philanthropic efforts. But we do it through partnerships, right? So it's important to provide the skills, but it's also important to have those public-private partnerships. And the organizations that we work with are the ones closer to the communities. They understand their needs, and we work with them to make it relevant for the community and to make sure that we are not just providing the skills, but we are providing job opportunities as well in those communities. And I think that's what's important. That's what's going to lead to social and economic mobility for those populations. So we work with partners, which is, the second most important thing, right? First, the investment in skills and platforms, and we provide the skilling through our IBM Skills Build platform, but also through really innovative partners, right, globally, that provide the in-person skilling opportunities and provide that connection to jobs as well. And that's where we can be really successful. So I have a couple examples that I wanted to share. So for example, in South Africa, we're working with Junior Achievement and Black Girls Code to provide STEM skills to young people. We have partnered with 300 universities across a number of countries in Africa where we are bringing those tech skills and those power skills as well to students so that they can be prepared for these jobs. And then we are working with Heifer International in Malawi. And this is a focus on sustainability and how we work with smallholder farmers to provide access to digital tools and digital skills so that they can increase their crop yield and increase productivity. So this is another way that we are preparing these communities for these types of jobs. So, this for us is extremely important, but those public-private partnerships are critical for the success of skilling and upskilling and making sure that we are preparing people for the green economy.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful, actually, to get that perspective. And I appreciate the very concrete examples you gave. And in this notion of partnerships that you're referring to, it's very clear that corporate philanthropy is now moving towards climate. I mean, at JP Morgan, most of what we've done in climate is our business, but our corporate responsibility is also moving in that direction as well. So it's nice to see that alignment. If I could now move on to the role of telecommunications and payments to ensure a just transition, I'd like to turn to Ibrahim Sahan to provide your experience on how the sectors of the future will play a role in creating jobs and ensuring adaptation. Do you believe that we will have a fundamentally different economy in emerging markets in the future? And what sectors need to be most transformed to avail of climate opportunities?
Thank you for being with us today, and as an Egyptian, we are proud to be meeting you all here in Sharm el-Sheikh. And definitely, this topic is related to what we are doing since 15 years ago. We started as a private investment company and build and operate what we call digital transformation solution at that time. And after that, the digital transformation being also a very important part for financial inclusion. And now both the digital transformation and financial inclusion is very important core for climate change. And from time to time, since our journey, we succeeded to build and operate many solutions that affect the progress in many areas in the market. It's good for us to present to you some success stories and the effect of this for the climate change now. We started, build and operate what we call the hub for electronic payment, for collection and payment for the whole government, including the digital transformation for the financial physical budget for the Egyptian market for Ministry of Finance. And we succeeded since 5 years ago that we canceled all the deals with the checks paper, and now all automated and all is digital orders for payment. And this is it's a huge change in the government for digital transformation to deal with the whole corporates and individuals. Now we are dealing with around 40 million Egyptians as a beneficiary for the whole system that we are operated. That's just this services is different services between paying taxes or customs or salaries, payroll or whatever, pension and other initiatives for subsidies. If we will focus more and more for some projects, we started with implementing many platforms. This one of them is for what we call cash subsidy program. Is called the Takaful Al Karama. Is the first cash subsidy program initiated by the government and World Bank, and we are now operating since 4 years ago. And the number of beneficiaries around 4 million. 85% from them is women from Upper Egypt, from rural area, and they using now what we call payment card. And this payment card from our ecosystem that covering the whole governorate, they can cash in or cash out from any cash access point that bringing cash or payment for them. And this card also be using for their services as long as it's health services or whatever other services during the hospital treatment or other things. And also for education for their children in the schools or the university to pay the fees. And this is a very good change for them and for the country and for those people. And also we implement since 2 years ago what we call an e-commerce platform, specifically in agribusiness. And we built an ecosystem for agribusiness. This platform that handling more than 3 million farmers. Those farmers that have a card and mobile, and now we changed the card to mobile, and they have all their payment through or subsidy through this card and mobile. And also we link the B2B agribusiness with our e-commerce platform, and those farmers also can using the platform for their producer. And definitely this program is a huge program because, as you know, the agri business here in Egypt is very important. And now from time to time we change it more and more. And we have also another program for women. It's a gender program. This program is called Tahwisha, not for the payment but also for the savings. and we go to the land and implementing whatever they needed as a culture for their saving and implemented in a digital way, and now they using the mobile between them for their savings, and definitely all this linked with the banks. This is, we implement with the country what we call non-banking services to be banking services, non-banking people to be going more and more for the banking solution. This is one of the things that we are very successful in, and we being more and more a digital arm for the government and for the initiatives also from the private business. And definitely we have more than programs like this on other sectors, and we are willing to implement all those with our neighbors and our African people, countries that we are definitely needs to those solutions, and this is one of our vision in near future. And definitely you understand how all those solutions and what we implement is against the or helping more and more for climate change and adaptation. Thank you very much.
No, thank you so much. I think that was really interesting to see how you're actually enabling the public sector in many ways to deliver a lot of its programs. And we recently worked on a bond for the Egyptian government that funded the Haya Karima program. So I know, the kind of deep programs that they have for the country, and also your focus on agriculture, for example, which is definitely a sector that will need a lot of investment for adaptation as well. So thank you. And then last but not least, I want to turn to Jürgen from the EBRD, and thank you for joining us. And I think in today's panel we've heard about the just transition in the context of moving to renewable energy and taking affected communities into account, but also the growing energy needs in Africa and many parts of the emerging world. We've also spoken about initiatives that help businesses and workers adjust to the impacts of changing climate and to build resilience. What are your views and the actions that EBRD has taken in your projects to address these issues in your member countries? And any examples that you could share with the
Yeah, thank you very much, Fahim. And ladies and gentlemen, if you now want to leave, I can fully understand that, because you don't want to listen to someone who cannot even find a meeting room. And honestly, I think I saw all the meeting rooms within the last 30 minutes or so, so my step counter is doing really well. But to your question, Fahim, just transition considerations need to be tailored, we believe at the EBRD, to the needs of specific countries and sectors. And let me start by highlighting some of the countries we operate in. You probably know we operate in countries from Central Europe to Central Asia, the Western Balkans, and the Southern and Eastern Mediterranean. And the EBRD regions have approximately 11% of global coal reserves. The majority, by the way, of which are located in Ukraine, Poland, and the country where I lived in for a few years, Kazakhstan. There are 240 coal-fired power plants across our countries, producing about a quarter of EBRD's region's electricity. And in some of EBRD's countries of operations, such as, for example, the Western Balkans, coal accounts for over 70% of electricity generation. So coal-related activities generate also significant employment across EBRD region, and they are at risk of being affected by decarbonization. So we estimate that more than 1 million jobs are directly or indirectly linked to coal activities. By the way, this will not be a plea towards coal. I'm just setting out the difficulties. So while coal is the immediate focus, many of our economies are also reliant on other fossil fuels, such as oil and gas. And by the way, hard to abate sectors, steel, petrochemicals, which will also need to decarbonize. So in our region, there's a strong need to reduce carbon dependency. We must consider just transition in that particular context. So what did we do? We just launched Just Transition Initiative in 2020. It aims to ensure a green economy transition that opens new opportunities for all while protecting vulnerable regions and people from falling behind. We implement this initiative through policy support and investments. And on the investment side, we support investments across, for example, green economy transition, human capital development, and regional economic diversification. In North Macedonia, for example, and you asked me, Fahin, to also provide some examples, we are supporting the deployment of solar PV on the site of a former coal mine. And actually, I visited that last year. In this and other cases, we also supported clients in establishing partnerships with national ministries and education providers to promote access to upskilling and reskilling initiatives and to new types of jobs, actually, and sustainable livelihoods in a greener economy. Another example includes EBRD's participation in a bonds with a Polish utility to finance renewables and grid investments, while also supporting a company-level decarbonization plan and reskilling for the staff in the heavily coal-reliant region. On the policy level, we help policymakers to set clear signals to investors via climate policy documents. We also bring together public and private stakeholders for the development and, hopefully I pronounce this right, just transition diagnostics and action plans. We are currently working on this with regional counterparts, again in North Macedonia, but also in countries like Serbia. And these diagnostics help stakeholders understand the socio-economic impacts of decarbonization scenarios, including setting out effects on local labor markets and identifying economic diversification opportunities. But we have raised our ambition level. In 2020, we launched our GET 2.1 approach, setting an ambition of over 50% green investments by 2025. And of course, you can argue, is this ambitious enough? When you realize that last year, EBRD actually invested in projects of 51% already in the green economy. But this year, we all know it's a year of crisis, and not everything we do, we actually can attach conditionalities. So you will actually see this dropping to below 50% again. Last year, we also launched our new gender and equality of opportunity strategies, highlighting the nexus between our green and inclusive investments as a key priority for us going forward. The final example, and a great example, particularly because we're here in Egypt, is the Nexus Water, Food, Energy Initiative, the NEWOBI, and which we are coordinating the energy pillar of that with Egypt, which aims to retire 5 gigawatts power capacity here in Egypt by 2025 and deploy 10 gigawatt of solar and wind energy by 2028. And actually the initiative addresses two of the most common issues that prevent countries from goals. First, strengthening the energy grid to absorb new capacity and supporting a just transition for affected workers. And this will, ladies and gentlemen, mobilize dollars for technical assistance, grants, and concessional loans from donors and IFIs to address critical bottlenecks. And importantly, this will include targeted support for workers that are affected by the decommissioning of plants. So EBRD will support the Egyptian Electricity Holding Company, as well as its subsidiaries, suppliers, and public authorities in managing the social impacts of decarbonization strategy by designing and implementing a package of strategic workforce management activities. And I probably should leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jürgen. Appreciate your remarks. I'm so glad you found us. And I appreciate you giving these very concrete examples, especially those in Egypt, right? And I think that you mentioning water as an important part of this climate equation is also very meaningful. I'm going to actually just turn to each of you if I can, because in this year's COP, the theme of this year's COP is action, right? And I would love each of you to give me one sentence, 1 minute, on what each of you would think as the action we need that would be the most meaningful to achieve a just transition. And maybe we go down the line and get each one's thoughts very quickly. James.
Hello?
Action.
It's a really good point because we do talk about this place, don't we? But I think, you know, we are the UK Treasury, we're effectively the Finance Department. I think that and this has been a theme of meetings I've been to before, it is looking at the effective ways of leveraging in private investment, right? Because the scale of investment, just on what we're talking about today, on all aspects of net zero is enormous, and I think there's a lot of progress, there's a lot of really good things happening, but I think there's more to be done on that. That's in the G20 as well, or G7, and if we achieve that, then we can get the scale of investment to make this doable.
Thank you.
So the private sector has to continue to create and invest in scalable solutions that leverage technology to really impact vulnerable communities. I think with the just transition, it's really important to double down on those communities and make sure they're not being left behind. And that's the primary action that a lot of private companies need to make.
Thank you. So I think there are a couple of points. The first one is how can we have proper conversations around supply chains globally? How can we look at the amount of resources that we need going forward, mine them sustainably, process them in an efficient way, in a way that we can localize industry in Africa, create jobs in Africa that will prevent migration from Africa to Europe, because they're all linked. You know, creating jobs in Africa is a key part of achieving net zero. Second point is how can we build resilient infrastructure that allows us to withstand the impacts of climate change. We have to find a way for us to make Africa less vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And thirdly, we need financial innovation. Financial innovation for additional access to capital, financial innovation to lower the cost of capital, financial innovation that will allow conservation of forests, provide alternative cooking fuel for vast majority of Africans, financial innovation that will lead to implementation of all the work streams that will lead to net zero.
In less than a minute, we have to accelerate what we succeeded on by grabbing more and more market segment, more than what we did, and not only in Egypt and beyond, inshallah. Thank you very much.
Look, this year we saw wildfires in France. I have a host pipe ban in the country which I now see home, and that is the UK. I actually had the board management retreat last week. I did wine tasting in the UK. I see many of you laughing, but and they have great wines indeed. But this cannot go on. So I think we all understand the urgency of the problem. What my hope is actually that all the promises we've seen last year in Glasgow, but also much earlier before, that we actually, all the pledges we made, that they come through. And it's not for nothing that we all call this the COP of implementation. So let's really try to do what we have promised to do. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. I wanted to close with a very warm thanks to all your panelists. You've just been on point, and I loved all the examples you've given, but also to the audience and to our host, the government of Egypt, to bring this all together. I think that I'm glad we ended with action, but it is important to talk and to build this kind of multi-stakeholder collaboration on what we need for economic growth and energy access in many of our countries, and then decarbonization in many others, and to move the financing where it's needed most. I think just transition and just finance are topics that are here to stay in the climate agenda, and I really appreciate all your work in moving the climate agenda forward. Thank you.
Thank you.